Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. As always, support the podcast. You can do that through the website, donations. I take donations, geopoliticsandempire.com. You can find the links there. Or the best way to support me is by becoming a paid subscriber on the Geopolitics and Empire Substack. I do a weekly analysis of world events, and also we organize off-the-record Zoom calls for supporters only to shoot the breeze, to discuss what's happening in the world. You can also purchase a consult if you want to chat with me, and check out my affiliates. Purchasing from them helps support the transmission. Leave a podcast review. Sign up to all of my social channels. Joining us for the first time is Reverend Dr. Father Patrick John Ramsey. He's a priest monk serving in the UK in a diocese of the Patriarchate of Antioch. He serves a small parish located in Norfolk in England. He's also an online tutor for the Institute for Orthodox Christian Studies in Cambridge, England. He's originally from New Zealand. He's been an Orthodox Christian since 1996, a monk from 2006, and a priest since 2010. He's got degrees in mathematics, law, and theology. He's also published books on the minor clergy of the Orthodox Church and on the Church. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, Father Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I'm curious, how did you come across geopolitics and empire?
Oh, I think must be one of my list of my YouTube channels. I saw you pop up there, and it was a discussion of another Orthodox theologian or commentator, and I was quite interested in the topic. So I thought, oh, that sounds a bit like me. And it seemed that you were, from his topic, was very similar to my views on things, and the title of your show was very much in my interests in the relationship between church and state, and a special love for empire and things like that. So I thought, oh, this would be good, nice to come and have a chat and have someone to bounce off some ideas.
Very cool. I mean, we have these organic sort of meetings online, and I'm pretty sure who you're referring to was the Portuguese Justino Carneiro. Yes. So shout out to Justino if he's listening. Anything to add about your background that I read?
No, that's pretty much it. Yes. What else to be? Yeah, no, that'll do. My PhD is sort of in hierarchy of the church, which is an interest, playing off between the papacy and Eastern ideas of the hierarchy of bishops, etc. Playing off one of the so-called, there's a thing called Eucharistic ecclesiology now, which is quite a big from East and West, and sort of critiquing that in a bit, moving much more towards a hierarchical model of the bishops, more central in the Eucharist. But sort of a nuanced scene on the papacy is my interest. And then tied with that is sort of an interest between the relationship between the hierarchy of the church and the empire, which is another aspect of that. And the only other thing to add is I've spent time on Mount Athos, the monastic centre there for a couple of years. So that was a great experience, and living in a place of empire still alive in some ways. So it harkens back to the empire, and the buildings are all the same. The monasteries carry on, and the land that they own, etc., is all imperial grants, etc. So, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So, I talked to almost everyone. We've had, I'm an evangelical sort of Christian, so I've had guests on. I've had on Orthodox, such as yourself, Justino, Yuri Roshka. I can't remember them all. We had Thaddeus Kozinski, Catholic, recently. I have atheist, liberal, globalists on. I've even had a few New Agers on, although not quite a fan of that stuff. But to ask you, I guess just to start, big picture, I tend to ask my guests, your thoughts on the state of the world. I think you probably see things as I do, it just becoming more and more evident over time for everyone that there's this, global empire that's emerging. It's totalitarian in nature. It reminds, we think of the Bible, which warns of this beast that's going to take over the planet and just crush the global population. And it really feels like we are in the early innings, in the early stages of that. What's sort of your feel for what's going on?
I'm pretty much in a similar sort of opinion. You can see the biblical style of an Antichrist ruling the world, the mark of the beast and things. I think we've got now the technology that this can come into place, and the political, the world, the globalization of travel, communication, again, the power that a centralized government could actually exercise that sort of control over the world. I'm not sure if it's there yet, but it's certainly pretty much the context for it to become real in the next 20, 50 years is, if not soon, is certainly, I think, becoming into place. So I'm pretty much, we can see that. We are getting more totalitarian, and in the sense of governments, they're starting to be more controlling. The government is becoming more the center of the population and do what you're told. Ideas like in the UK, I'm not sure if it's in the US, 15-minute cities, you're allowed to go here. Living in a village, I mean, 15-minute city is just complete. How do I walk anywhere in 15 minutes to get to a nearest supermarket? You've got to be kidding. But nevertheless, that sort of thing is starting to come along. I think, though, that we have a couple of curveballs being thrown into it, like Trump coming into power. Is he a curveball to try to break into more opposed to the centralization of the World Health Organization, the UN? Is he breaking into smaller, more regional type things again, what Russia's trying to do in China? Or is he just another cog in the wheel which is leading towards this? I do think one of my bigger perspectives on the Antichrist rising is ultimately, I believe that such a power can only really come out of a world crisis and some sort of world war, some form of major. Then he will come as the savior of the world. He will bring order, he'll bring peace, he'll bring food and everything to move on. So people will basically, if they are attached to life in this world and prosperity and the good peace of this world, will be attracted to him as God, because he will basically fix the problems of this world. So I think we are seeing the potential of this sort of war triggering off with Russia, Ukraine, in the Middle East, Israel, Iran. Now, a lot of these things look like they're just about to explode, and then they just sort of peter out a little bit. But you can see the potential for something there. When it would be triggered, I don't know, but certainly the potential's there. The other thing that is you can see is an increasing sort of sense, like if you look at the Pope, new Pope coming in, a lot of religions are focused more on peace in the world as an end in itself, rather Christ sort of says, oh, there'll be wars and things like this, and I don't come to bring peace, etc. The Christianity is not necessarily about peace in this world and an end in itself, but you get a lot of the religious leaders talking about peace and unity in human terms and removing human sort of level divisions, etc. And I think this sort of mindset is again building up, preparing people for some type of Antichrist, world religion, we're all brothers and all the rest of it sort of thing, trying to water down religious conflict, religious division, which some ways is actually healthier, because that means that people are actually interested in religion in the bigger scope and truth, etc. But this has been worn down. We're getting much more secularized in our behavior, our thinking. Then you've got the whole movement of the wokeism, etc., dominating. So, and that's very controlling. And when I talk about empire and government, well, that is because it's a human secular thing. It becomes quite controlling. So yes, I think everything, as you are the same way, is building towards that. From a particular Orthodox perspective, one of my concerns now is that the Orthodox Church is a church of tradition. It is a tradition that's passed on from generation to generation. And what we've seen in the last 100 years and probably increasing, that those traditions are breaking down in their continuity. They're sort of still continuing somewhere, somehow, not universally, but in some place, one tradition's continuing here, no one's continuing here, this church is doing this right, and like the 7 letters in Revelation, this church is doing this well, but it's getting smaller and smaller, and they're breaking down. And from my perspective, once tradition breaks in a sense of its continuity somehow in time, then you basically end the sense of the apostolic tradition being passed from generation to generation. And that also helps me to point towards the end, that how can the church in the sense of tradition truly continue if that tradition is broken and sort of a continuity from the apostles. So that's also concerning me, and it's almost like Christ come back, because if the church is truly one that is preserving the tradition of the apostles through every generation in practice as well as in the doctrine, then we are really getting into trouble now. So anyway, that's my little spiel on that.
Yeah, I've got so many things to ask you, but I mean, it makes logical sense, again, for people who've read the Bible or haven't, like all these little things, these nuggets that add up. The return of Israel on the scene, things when it says the gospel will be preached to all people groups and then the end will come. That's pretty much almost been accomplished. As you say, as the church dwindles to almost non-existence, that's another sign. Just so many of these things, the technology to enable a world empire. So it just seems like it's around the corner. And as you say, I can see it coming as early as the 2030s. Or the decades afterward, or who knows? Well, I guess time will tell. Let me ask you about your thoughts on the empire. I think it's been around obviously for centuries, if not, millennia, effectively. But what's your take on the nature of this beast? The Bible speaks of it coming out of the land and another one coming out of the sea. And it's unclear, people have all these little charts to say it's this country or that country or this grouping of countries. But we do see this, you had the Roman Empire, the British Empire. I feel like those are all somehow still one empire, because the British Empire came, you had the Holy Roman Empire, and then out of that came the British.
Yes. This is look, I think I have a distinction between the empire which you're talking about in a historical sense from the Roman Empire and what will become from the Antichrist as whatever form of government he will have. And I base this on sort of St. John Chrysostom is very interesting. So for St. John Chrysostom, when he looks at the verses in Thessalonians about the Antichrist coming, and it says something will be taken out of the way, what he interprets this to mean is the empire. The empire will be taken out of the way. That's the empire that is actually holding back the Antichrist. And so, of course, he's referencing to the Roman Empire. So what we see in the Roman Empire in its Western form, we can talk about it stopping about 476, which actually historically all that happened was that there was no more Western emperor, because for 550 Rome was reintegrated back into the empire until about 750 with certain invasions of the Lombards. But even then it is effectively still kept in the imperial realm until Charlemagne comes along and forms the Holy Roman Empire. And the Eastern Empire obviously carried on right to 1453. Now, okay, so the lineage of Roman emperors per se sort of finishes in 1453. But of course, you can talk about the Holy Roman Empire in the West continuing a type of lineage from that. Then you have a developing Russian Empire, and you have a developing British Empire, which all basically feed off the same sort of imperial thing. And I'll go into that in a minute. And then recently, you have the American Empire, Pax Americana. I wrote this in an essay to the American. He said, stop being political, but many commentators are out there. Look at the U.S. government, the Senate. This is this core of the Roman Empire, the eagle, the buildings and things. The symbolism is all Roman Empire, and the Pax Americana. And so they are there today. Now, what I understand is that the empire is a sense, an empire which is not a global government, but large enough in this global reach that in a way keeps a certain level of peace. Not because it has absolute peace, but it has lots of little wars squashing out dissidents and things and keeping things in sort of order. It's big enough to scare everybody to stop them going bigger. What's happened is that the US is starting to become weaker. And now we're seeing the Ukraine-Russian war. Russia's not scared of the US anymore. It feels like it can go to war there. China is probably starting to think, okay, Taiwan, we can get rid of this little rebellious group and sort it out. The US is probably not going to be able to do much about it. They're still not pressing it yet. So I think the US is diminishing in its power, particularly under Biden, where it didn't project the power. Now, Trump is sort of re-projecting that power and trying to re-grasp that good old American traditional stuff things. So it's sort of a bit of a delay in this. So I think that while there is an empire of this nature, not the global government, then I think there will not be the catastrophic war which will cause us a reason for the Antichrist to come. But if the US loses its power hegemony in a significant way, which could possibly be particularly problematic if there's a massive economic collapse in the US, if that comes in, and then it is unable to project itself beyond its own borders, then I think we could see a lot of conflict starting to trigger off further, because there's a lot of people like the Turks and the Greeks, Iran, Israel, whatever goes on in the Middle East, that's probably the center point of most of it. And China, India, Pakistan. You could just see recently India, Pakistan sort of flaring up again. The US sort of steps in and puts it say, yeah, what are you doing? So I think while the US is still strong, then things will probably be okay. But underneath, Israel coming back, the building of a temple is something that's getting more prominent now. That's a huge sign towards the Antichrist once that's built. Obviously, they have to knock down the Dome of a Rock, which will cause a little bit of a storm amongst the.
Although some people say that it's possible that they could build it next to the Dome of the Rock. I've heard that,
but I've heard other people say it's going to go on top. I think basically, if the Israelis are feeling strong enough, they'll just get the bulldozers and take the thing out. Why bother? Why not? And I think they're starting to get established now. I think the whole thing with Gaza, etc., is that Israel is feeling a lot more confident now. Arabs, we are fighting and you're doing nothing. Well, we'll just do what we want to do, which is basically take out Gaza, the West Bank, and for the greater sense, they've already pushing into Syria to make sure they've got their buffer zone almost at the doors of Damascus. So then they've sorted out the thing with Hezbollah. So yeah, it's very interesting. So that's sense. Now, on the case of the Chrysostom talks about empire going. So I'm in the opinion that we can still see that continuing, at least symbolically, now into the state. And I think while that remains at some level, whereas the end is not going to come, I think it's when the US breaks down as able to maintain it, then the potential for a wider conflict will come in, and then that will give rise to the Antichrist. Now, in the Antichrist's one, I think it's going to be more that he can save the world. And so by accessing technology, etc., he will be able to bring peace and things like that. So I think it's because of the ability to basically manage what's left of the world, which could be down to about a third of the population after the wars and stuff. As I read Revelation, there's at least a third going to be wiped out, if not really 2/3. Things will be broken. All countries will be broken. Systems will be broken. So I think he'll project a worldwide power out of the chaos there and establish it and things. So, and I think I can see that happening, and he could bring sort of peace to the peoples, and the people will be willing to accept him because he'll be able to restore order, transport links, and everything like that to reintegrate the world. So that's what I see, and I think initially it's going to be quite a benign. It's going to be want people going, well, this is peace and safety in our days, sort of thing. And once he's established and got power, I think that's when it's going to be more like, here's a mark, now you must worship me. Once he's got established, he put that across, and then he's going to start persecuting Christians or those in opposition to him. You won't be able to eat things without the mark, etc. And you can see this already with COVID, of the COVID passports. You're not allowed to go here, you're not allowed to do this. So already we are starting to see the testing of these ideas, and it looks quite scary what happened in COVID, the global reach of those ideas and thoughts, and the ability to start controlling the people's movement, locking them down, and the people just sort of following along. There's always going to be some revolt against it. But so I see that. I think there's an interesting one I saw. Sorry, I'm just rambling a little bit. I hope you don't mind. Someone was talking about there's about a 30-40-30 split. And they said there's 30% of people just go for control. 40% basically just follow along with that. And there's always 30% that's sort of, what are you doing? Which always makes me think that when you have a parliament where you are getting things which are going to change constitutions or control, you should have about 80% or 75% vote. So you're having to include the 30% in the actual vote. Otherwise, it's too easy to get the 30% controllers just get the people on, which is what exactly happened during COVID. You get the small backbenchers sort of going in Britain, hey, what are you doing? But too much, and people just swept along, no, we've got to do this. And I'm worried, like parties like the Labour Party in power, they are very much these 40% sort of carry on. Let's go, let's control everything. But we have got this new rise of another party under Farage, which represents that opposition group. But of course, they will get into power, and now we'll have that 40-30 split as well. So they'll end up sort of becoming conformist to some level as well. So anyway, that's it. So I'm not sure exactly what the Antichrist will be like, but certainly I think he'll pick up the pieces, save the world, reintegrate everyone, and then once he establishes himself in power, maybe some miracles, maybe whatever, he'll start asking the worship of the world.
What just came to mind was Arthur C. Clarke. He wrote that book, I think in the 50s, 53, I don't remember, A Childhood's End. I never read it, but I just very recently, I've enjoyed science fiction for a long time because of how it can visualize these wondrous and awesome scenarios. And I don't necessarily always mean awesome as in a good way, but awesome like in the mind-boggling, scenarios. And I just watched the 2015 3-4 hour film adaptation. I think it was Australian television that produced it, and it was very well made. And it's very, he was riffing, I think, off of the Bible, where these overlords come to earth, they make peace, heal all disease, but then a few decades later, they take the children, and the entire human race dies out. So it's kind of like they very well depict, a rhyme of what might be coming. I want to ask you about the world states, because it's implied, in the book of Daniel, Revelation, that everything's being centralized towards one world state. And leaving the Bible aside, I mean, going back a century plus, the elites ad nauseum talk about the current, mainstream papers talk about a world state. So, do you think what do you see as the infrastructure for that? Is it the stuff that already exists? United Nations, all these agencies, the European Union, or do you think something new will be born after this crisis event?
Well, if we're going to have a crisis event, I think that a lot of us is going to be severely damaged and pulled apart. So if there is a severe world war, the authority of something like the UN might be severely broken down. Its ability to continue to function as a UN might be severely broken down. So I'm not necessarily expecting that these things like the WEF, the World Economic Forum, WHO, the UN, will necessarily morph into the organizations that the Antichrist is using. However, they're certainly building up the infrastructure, the thinking, the way of managing these things, the test cases. So I think probably something new will come out of it, but these are all leading towards and building towards the framework, the theory, the practical application. They've been tested. As I said, COVID was a sort of good testing ground for some of this material, and who seems to be getting more power in this. And some of the individuals may shift across and become those working with the Antichrist. But I think perhaps if there is a big crisis, some of them might get a little bit dented and come back in a slightly morphed new form. They could continue. I'm not quite sure, but certainly they are. You're right that there's a big movement towards global control, and I think again with wars, etc., try to bring more peace and stuff. They say if that happens. Yes, unfortunately, it also means that human beings are starting to get more and more control over the population based on what principles. That is where it comes down to, and this is like where my interest in church and empire comes into, is ultimately I'm seeing if things are becoming secular, then really it becomes over two powers. One, it's just it becomes a power game over some humans in charge with their vision of what the world shall be, or ultimately even more than that, it's basically Satan getting in charge, who is behind the scenes coordinating a lot of this. I think so. That's one thing we have to think about in a religious sense, that we may not say people can say, "Oh, look, there's no sort of coordination to this one world thing at a human level. They're not quite talking to each other." But if Satan's there, he's probably moving everyone in his direction. But his way of doing things is destructive to humanity. He's not a friend of humanity. He wants to destroy humanity. So he'll play on peace and all these things, but his ways of thinking about it are destructive. And the way he controls people to bring them in is through their passions. It's through their greed. It's through their pride. It's through the lust for this and stuff. He draws people in by giving them, as like for Christ when he said you'll have the control of the world, you can have this glory and all these things. So he plays on this, and that's I think where he controls people through these things, and he controls it through humans with blackmail and all these other things on each other and the pleasures, etc. So he uses that. So the people that are getting in charge are usually quite addicted to their passions and stuff, are not Christians, are not the sort of people that are committed to ascesis of faith, love of the neighbor, except in some sort of superficial humanistic manner. So I'm getting very worried as more you cut Christianity or religion out of these things, or you reduce religion to some sort of personal private matter, which is you do in your bedroom or at home, but it's nothing to do with the state, that we are going to be getting increasingly power groups in who are there by power, and their ideas are imposed by power, And anything secular ultimately will end up with a control group trying to enforce their opinion on others. This is what happened with communism, Nazism, any of these particular wokeism is basically doing the same thing. It's an imposition of one person's ideology by force, trying to control other people to do what they want to do. And this is the way of human government, left separated from really a Christian base. So anyway, that's sort of my thoughts.
I'm trying to find, there's a great tweet from Ken Ham Answers in Genesis not long ago saying how, people think secularism, it's a religion. Honestly, I don't think there is, you can never not have a religion. And sometimes these New Agers attack me for talking too much about Christianity, not realizing that they also espouse a system of belief, a religion.
Yes. Well, what's even more interesting is when I was young in the 70s, 80s, a lot of people attacking Christianity because it's intolerant and it's imposing itself. Sorry, when you get these the secular people in government, the woke people, they're extremely intolerant. They're absolutely even more imposing. As a matter of fact, Christianity is a religion that in its good form is tolerant. And it's something else I'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, it is tolerance. And yeah, I find the hypocrisy of this. But yeah, I can go into a whole theory of why this can be from a Christian point of view.
Well, I've got, just so many questions with so much of the stuff you brought up. But just go back for a second. When we talk about the world empire, I differ slightly sometimes from some of the things I hear some Orthodox folks say, or even some evangelical folks say, where they hold out some hope in Russia, or you mentioned earlier Trump, as some form of opposition. But then when I read, Revelation 13, it says, the whole world was filled with wonder, with the beast, who can wage war against it? And it says it was given power, authority over every tribe, every people, every language, and every nation. And so for me, there comes a point where Russia, the United States, China, Europe, they all come under. So there's really no political solution. Just quick thought on that.
Yeah, look, as I say, Trump may be a delay for a little while. Russia may delay things for a little while, but they're certainly not going to stop this happening. And you can see, as I said, the Trump, there is a sort of return to Christianity, but it's more about a conservative nationalism than it is about a commitment to Christianity per se. And when you're conservative nationalism, you're based on a human agendas, human priorities. You're playing in the Satan's hand. He'll play off that for you to sort of fall into nationalistic wars, which is probably what's going to drive most of wars, is nation versus nation fighting each other. And it's the empire, which is transnational, that sort of keeps these things in place. But as soon as you've got nation to nation, though maybe people like to talk about a multipolar world, I'm going, actually, that's more dangerous. And so Russia is becoming also very much an ethnic national culture, and it's putting nationhood above the church. So I'm concerned with Russia in the sense that it's becoming more like Britain was in the 19th century, 18th century, where the church is sort of a tool of state, and rather than being a check on the state and a conscience of the state. And though it is not quite the state in control of the church in Russia, I can see lots of signs that the church is becoming focused for ethnic reasons, and it's sort of feeling itself able to push itself beyond its own borders, which supports Russian aggression outside. So yeah, maybe Russia will hold things. There is a case in the Orthodox that Russia will take out Constantinople and Turkey. I could see that coming. It's not in the immediate. The slowness of the war with Ukraine means I'm not expecting any wonderful fireworks over a short space of time. But nevertheless, that's one of the prophecies that they have. So there might be a small return of an empire in the sense of Constantinople. But again, these are short-lived, no more than a decade or two delaying things before, as you say, the Antichrist will wage war against all nations and subject all people. So, yeah, and I can already see that these Trump and Russia, there's weaknesses in their way of being, and a sort of a nationalism taking priority to ecclesiology of the church as a transnational universal salvation for God. So, yeah, they might delay things, but certainly they won't stop it.
And just to go back for a second, I find fascinating, people often ask, who is the they running the world? And I often reference a former occultist. He still seems to be a Gnostic. His name is Mark Passio. And I really took his phrase, which he calls the occultocracy, these dark occultists, technocratic occultists that are basically formed. There's definitely a hierarchy here on Earth that's running the show, but ultimately, I believe, people are blaming the Jews. And I'm thinking there were periods of history where Jews didn't have power, and so again, who was running the show back at that moment? It's the same. And, ultimately at the end of the day, it's Satan. And I'm just curious, I guess a few questions there, but one question for you. No one can know for certain, but maybe your speculation of the mechanism of how Satan interacts with humanity. We've read in the Bible that there are supernatural ways where he can influence, leaders. There's, forms of possession or just persuasion. Maybe he can influence thoughts to make certain decisions. We also have on record, there's many instances of people. I had a recent podcast on Aleister Crowley, right, where these occultists, they do these rituals to invoke. I knew a former pagan who told me he could get demons or fallen angels to manifest by, saying, I will just, give me the power or whatever. And so any thoughts on how you would describe the hierarchy of who rules the world and Satan, how Satan sort of can, that connection between the metaphysical and the physical? Yes.
No, it's a good question. Well, we've got the hierarchy of Satan and his angels there. So they provide the sort of a backbone, the spiritual backbone behind this, and they, in a sense, can coordinate. Now, the first point of contact would be some of these groups in the occult. And what I've noticed in the UK, talking to one of my teacher friends, is that the occult is becoming quite strong among the population. So, for example, even at the school she teaches at, a number of teachers are into the occult. A number of students have sort of manifested demonic manifestations in the classroom when she's been there. So she's even had a cross ripped off her neck by some force and thrown against the ceiling. So there are demonic powers getting stronger and stronger as man abandons God. The love of power, the love of controlling demons to help you, etc. You were starting to go back to what's happening and what's been happening in Africa for centuries, is the dark powers and the demonic powers and the witch doctors. So this obviously is a much more direct place where Satan can control things. Of course, I've had very horrific stories of what happens when you start playing with these. These demons attack the people that call them out, and a number of people have come to bad ends because of this. It's not as true as quite often. So I do believe that there's quite a lot of elite are dabbling in the occult. Other than that, as I said earlier, Satan can have a lot of control if people are addicted to passions. The lust, food, power, things like this. He can give a lot. He can feed that either just through thoughts, by circumstances, arrangements, etc. And so I think he draws people on through their lusts, and he can control them basically for that. Because once you get addicted to your lusts, it's very easy to start drawing people on. For here's more money. Oh, look, now you got caught up with this. Here's these beautiful woman. Here's a beautiful. Well, now you're caught up. I'll control you through this. So I think this is how he plays on people. It's through their rejection of God, where you became a slave to Satan, really. And it's through thoughts, directed cult, etc. I think there's multiple ways. But as soon as you lose the protection of God, then yes, you become the spiritual powers are so much more powerful than us. They have effects and physical effects, as they can have, but just their thought wars, the thoughts they can put is enough. If you're addicted to your passions, just to be reminded of your passions, be worked up, you just become a slave. You just follow along, and then you can start controlling people. So, and you see a lot of these rich people, they're caught up in all these things. They're all connected into these things, and you get Epstein or whatever, and suddenly it comes out a lot of into really dangerous, dark things. These powerful people, because again, when you've got power and money, you tend to feed these things. So I think this is where Satan starts to control a lot of these. It's either the love of their cult, etc., because people want power or that, and usually they're playing on people's desires and lusts, several things that are the sins of the world. He just plays off it, and I think he can do that at multiple levels, wealth, etc. And yes, that's why I think he can control people. And of course, the whole thing is in God's providence and timing. So I think there may be many false starts towards the end, and God said, no, not yet. And so sometimes we think, everything's there, yeah, it's all going. And then suddenly, well, what happened? And then there's God, oh, no, there's some faithful person over there. There's maybe a few more converts. No, the numbers of Gentiles haven't been added in yet. Be patient.
That is an excellent point, and also I think explains a lot. I had conversations years ago with the Canadian pastor Arthur Pawlowski and Patrick Wood of Technocracy, who we're all on the same frequency, and both of them posited what you just said, where we've seen this, Satan, his plan, and Antichrist coming to the fore with false starts, as you put it. That's a great way to put it, with these false starts with Hitler and his Third Reich, and Napoleon and all these, the Roman Empire. And every time someone puts the kibosh on it, and people like Pawlowski and Wood say, for whatever reason, it wasn't time yet. So whether it was a mix of our human, the 30% resistance to these systems, plus the God's supernatural hand, it wasn't time yet. And so we keep seeing these false starts, but we see that the end game remains the same. And I've said for the longest time, they're like these waves that they come, they rise, and then they fall, but each successive wave is even bigger.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And I think World War I and World War II are very important, because they sort of broke certain the national things down, and opened a way for these League of Nations and then the UN, etc. So these are steps definitely towards the type of system for Antichrist to rule. They're all steps. And you're right, the wave of Napoleon, then the next wave, and the next wave, they all sort of build it more. And yes, it calms down for a little bit, but then it comes back, and eventually it'll just roll on in. And as God times and wills, permits it to happen. So yeah, there will always be people revolting. The Antichrist will be having to kill a lot of people. 30% of our population probably will be fighting or having to be sort of squashed down, brought into line. Where obviously, when you can't eat or buy anything without the mark of the beast, unless you've got some good friends who are really to smuggle things for you, you are going to be struggling not to take the mark, or just to die of hunger is not the easiest thing.
Yeah, well, with the technotronic systems that are being deployed, they won't even need to necessarily kill you. You'll just be starved to death. And again, if people look at the patterns, I focus a lot on seeing the patterns. And as 1800s Napoleon, 1900s Hitler, and then it's like every single time. So you would then expect here in the 21st century, we're going to see something of that nature, but even bigger. So it just makes pure logical sense. Let me ask you about, because we're talking about secularism, the new world religion, right? Because as you mentioning, Catholicism is being chipped at, Orthodox, in the Reformed world, we see many insane forms of churches now. And Lucis Trust, I've said many times, I've been attended a meeting of the Lucifer Publishing Company, this Luciferian theosophy, which is part of the United Nations, right? And so they're saying that Lucifer is the Christ. I mean, could it be any more evident for people who don't believe? I've got the pamphlet.
Just sorry to interrupt you for a second. I can't believe it. Some of these people are actually openly stating things like the Bible red flags. Oh, we'll do something with 666 in it. As if they're not throwing out. But it's like God says, no, if you're going to talk about it, you can make it. We'll make it open. The people are not going to be blindly tricked into this. They are going to go full open eyes. These things are just so clear. But it's just like, I can't believe it that they're speaking and talk about this. Could you be more obvious?
And so I guess my question is, how do you see this developing, this sort of new world religion? And we see this ecumenism. Trump was recently in UAE at the Abrahamic House, which has all three. It's like that place in and of itself, I feel, is part of this Antichrist new world religion system, because they're trying to merge the Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And then plus they want to bring in all the other world religions. You have things like Baha'i. I visited their temple, where they want to bring in all religions under one. And they're saying you can have no exclusive beliefs. Perennialism is one of those types of faiths. And so we're seeing a lot in the culture today. Increasingly, psychedelics are coming in, LSD, mushrooms, ayahuasca. And so, and this earth sort of religion. So it's like and these are all ancient religions. Carl Teichert talks about the age of reenchantment. So all that stuff is coming back again. None of this is new, right? Nothing's new under the sun. So how do you sort of see these developments, the world religion?
Well, quite a lot of concern, because they have basically totally integrated into Roman Catholicism now. The papacy may be one of the types of organization structures which helps to sort of provide a global religious head. So they sort of perform a structural organization which would be very helpful for this sort of global religion. But yes, so we've basically Christianity, and this is why I talk about tradition, in its traditional practices, etc., is very much broken down. You go to a lot of Protestants, they've become, the woke wave hit a lot of them. They just folded under that. But even if they don't fold under that, if you go to something like feminism is basically completely dominated almost all religious groups now. There's very few which will stand up and actually say, no, women are not to be pastors, bishops, etc. Now, the Roman Catholics still have a line, but in practice, they basically let women do everything. The last pope was pointing her the top of this and the head of this. Things that have been unheard of 100 years ago. So there is a massive breakdown of an influence of secular thinking, secular priorities, a way of thinking, which are not the Christian tradition at all, not what St. Paul teaches. There's a massive move to the culturalification of the scriptures. So, the head coverings of women, that's just a cultural thing of a time. It doesn't apply to us now. That was just cultural. That doesn't apply now. So the practice, the tradition of the practice of the church, which Paul says, keep it until strictly, is being totally undermined. Where you would go to most people, even in Orthodox people, you say women should be covering their heads. Oh, no, don't be silly. Oh, that's old. And just the fact that people go, that's old fashioned. That's not relevant now. That means they've actually won the ground. They've got in, and that most interesting symbol, because when you go back to the Garden of Eden, what it is, and this is driving the woman is deceived by to know good and evil, to be like God, not by God, by this magic, this thing of the earth. If you eat this, you will become like God. And in God, and she does that, and the man just follows along. Oh, okay. Take instead of saying, "Oh, God said that, woman, how dare you?" No, I'm not touching that. I'll take that. And then God puts an order of obedience to say, not that he's interested in woman obeying man continually. We are equal, but it's the symbol that man is to obey God, and there's a symbol of a male, female, and you see this in man is a glory of God, and woman is a glory of man. So this structure of obedience, the structure of the head covering, is to show man's relationship to God, and to obey this is to show obedience to God. That's why the structure is there. It's nothing about equality of man and woman. It's not trying to oppress woman. She's a free being or whatever, but it's about reminding mankind that we need to be in obedience to God. And this throwing off of the head covering stuff, this is man revolting against God. And man just saying, okay, women, that's all these churches, it doesn't matter anymore, these things. That's man taking Adam's position and seeing the equality in worldly terms. We have our equality now. We have equality through our human rights, our feminist right, our votes in the parliament, our equal wage. All these things are seeking equality with God now in human terms. And this is the symbolism is through this is powerful. And this symbolism is just right through Christianity now. You find it, what I'm saying seems very, really old-fashioned school. You're probably going, oh, but that's because this is so thoroughly through the thinking of Christianity. And I just use that as a sign that realistically, Satan's ideas and man grasping after peace in this world, brotherhood in this world, or how can we have divisions in this world? And so this ecumenism, we must have unity in this world. Oh, let's put aside things about the actual beliefs and doctrines and our practices. These things all don't matter. We just of this world. And so this is sort of a secularization, and you see all these religions becoming more and more secularized, and that's even reinforced by the fact of less religious wars. And, Protestants used to kill Catholics. Well, that's nice that there's peace, but the reason for that peace is because no one actually believes what they're not committed to the truth of their faith anymore. It's becoming this sort of humanistic love and cuddle each other thing that doesn't matter about actual truth. And so I see this right through Christianity. So I think the backbone of Christianity recently, and just I heard today, there was a bishop in Cyprus who was quite keeping a rigorous stand in relationship to the Roman Catholics and the Protestants. And he was deposed because they moved him because he was keeping that stand. The other bishops, again, you can see the hierarchy in the churches. The majority are sort of all for this ecumenistic union with, even though our traditions are Orthodox Church, the Roman Catholics are heretics. We reject the papacy as sort of satanic and evil. But this is all breaking down. You see the ecumenical patriarch with the Pope and at his inauguration, the new Pope. It's already breaking down, and the reason for this is basically secularization, the love of each other in human terms, sadly. So in that way, I'm quite worried that the groundwork for this universal religion is effectively in place. The mind and heart of most people is kicking and streaming on the outsides, but the majority, even if you go to someone like Putin, he's speaking in the same way but it's just in a nationalistic way. Oh, we accept Muslims and things like that. There's no priority Christians and stuff. He's still speaking that same language, even if he's Russian first. So, yeah, I think that we are very deep into this. There's small pockets, but they're just fundamentalists, extremists, nut jobs. They're quickly painted that way, and most people, because over the last century, really, we have been severely indoctrinated. Our universities are completely indoctrinated by this progressive woke things. Parliament is. I was listening to one of the Conservative Party. One guy's 30%er. He was objecting, and the guy just spouted out a complete progressive response to it. And yeah, okay, the Conservative Party, that's why they're basically no different from the Labour Party, because they're basically dominated by this culture, this mindset. Well, not surprising, because it's been in the universities since the 80s, from the 90s. When I was at university, I was noticing that back in the 80s, 90s, I was noticing this type of thing coming in. It's just got worse and worse and worse. And now you see Trump going a little bit of revolt, having a big war with Harvard, precisely on these sorts of things. So anyway, I think this one world religion and the mindset amongst the 70% at least is very, very well embedded now. And that is probably one of the biggest signs that we are heading towards one world government. Whether Chinese and communism is still a little actually an humanistic stand apart, but even China is evolving. It wants to keep its authority, but it's no longer communist. It's basically people running around with smartphones and a sort of controlled capitalist economy. Where their status of religion is still a little bit wobbly. In other words, how that's going to be integrated into some world religion. But I think if it's just religion is a nice private thing you do in your homes, is totally different from state, which is something I must talk about. Then, yeah, I think they'll just follow along. India, of course, all religions, you go to, they'll stick Christ up on their Parthenon of gods. They really water. The Baha'is are defined by this one world religion. I've had all sorts of interesting fun talking to Baha'is when I was younger. So Buddhists just will roll along with it. Animists basically all roll along with it. So yeah, the main ones, the Copts, the Armenians, they are sort of all basically coming along too. Or they've been affected by this thing. So there's not many people holding out on this anymore. Anyway, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and I, for me, it seems like when it comes to the Chinese, they just seem more materialistic, if anything, and not to stereotype the entire population group, but and here in Mexico, I've it's irritated me. This news recently, a Mexican politician was charged with being a gender-based political violator for calling a man, a man who dressed up as a woman.
In Mexico,
who's a man, and he was charged as a political violator, and he's seeking justice. And no, what you said about the women, any church that I've attended wherever I've lived, because I find the authentic churches, Baptist churches, and Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Croatia, here in Mexico, and the women, as you outlined, follow that hierarchy as prescribed in the Bible, and they're happy with it, and they're content, and they understand that's just how the world works. Now I'm going to get some comments, I'm sure, here, but the woman does the woman stuff, the wife, the mother, the guy does the guy stuff, the protector, nurturing, caring, bringing home the bacon, all that sort of stuff. And we're equal, but we have different roles, and so not, some people will be angered with that, but let me ask.
Yeah, but the fact that people get angry with that, and the fact you feel bad about saying that, which would have been completely acceptable 100 years ago and normal, it just shows exactly the fact that people get angry shows that the indoctrination, that they're basically indoctrinated by this. That's why there's an emotional reaction. They're just sort of to that. Otherwise, they say, oh, yes, that's an interesting way of thinking. They might say, I'm not sure if it's the best way of running a culture, having the freedom actually. And it's in a secular sense, there's more economics and all the rest of it. I can see some advantages. But when it comes to the deeper thing about what it is between man and God and our relationship to that, and actually the things like the family. Now, this is also important. So I'm just going to go on with breaking down for world government. Family ties are breaking down. That's a core identity. Like if you go to a young boy and you insult his mother, he'll go because that's the family identity. Dad insult my dad, but that's breaking down. And it's single parent families and things like this. The father not being part of the family in every family, that is a huge problem. And young people need the both parents to properly grow up and properly be socialized. And so we've got a social dysfunction increasingly all over the place. Then it's also breaking down village identity. We've basically broken that down, people moving all around. Then there is sort of regional identity. Again, we've got so much mobility in the modern world. That's all broken down. So we're becoming now national things. We've got some revolts against that. Russia is revolting against the US, but widespread immigration and etc. Now, I'm all for, in the sense, all people coming together as a Christian, but I can see also that this is destroying sort of ethnic identity. So in an Orthodox sense, we have a sense of a universal thing, and Chrysostom talks actually it's good to marry cross culture, but at the same time we have a localization which preserves culture, and each culture sort of has its sort of own control against an over-centralization, so that not only is humanity protected as individual, my own individual, my family identity is remained. We don't destroy my family identity, nor do I destroy my village identity, nor my place in my ethnos, my nation, my region, my nation. All these are important part of human identity, which ground us in multiple layers to be good functioning human. We are grounded in these layers of things. All these are being broken down. We become sort of individual amongst the world mass. That's not psychologically healthy for people. So while it's good to sort of have some crossover, if it gets so much where you're breaking down the ability to have these identities of village, family, which help stabilize people, and then you are in trouble. But I think this is deliberate because that means people are easier to control. So yeah, let's throw in another.
That's a great explanation, and I just give my personal example where I have a interracial marriage, and so it's Mexican and Croatian. But what I try to do is maintain, put as important my Croatian heritage and culture as well as the Mexican. But the globalist version, the bad version, I think, is this sort of globalist universal culture, which does away with both of those and wants to impose this sort of, what's coming out of Hollywood and entertainment and social media and this sort of secular liberal culture.
Yes. And you can see it, and an obvious thing is clothing. In the old days, if you go back 200 years ago, you go to a different village and they're all wearing different clothes. And there's like a village identity of clothes, and you go to a sort of regional identity of clothes and a national identity of clothes. And those clothing as part of that identity of who you are in a broader context of your person, your family, your village, your nation. You identify with your clothes. You have attachment through that, the way you build your houses. But now everyone dresses exactly the same. Yes, you have an individuality to choose but you no longer have a sort of group identity clothing unless you're sort of dressing up like myself. So that is also breaking down that cultural identity and things, and just all these symptoms. And we're individualizing, as you say, that secular, liberal, materialist, and it's happened in China, that's all broken down as well. And that just makes it easier to control people. So these are all things that are happening in our modern culture, which definitely are leading towards the ability for an Antichrist to sort of start controlling. And I think, unfortunately, the churches are losing their way. There's lots of pressure on the Roman Catholics. And you can see how much, if you go to meet the normal people, a lot of them are just quite secular in the way of thinking and things like that. I don't feel a sense of church piety. You will, if you go 100 years ago. It's very rare now to get people that have that distinctive Roman Catholic culture, or even some of the old Protestant cultures. If you go to something like the Brethren in New Zealand, you see some that are keeping quite an old-fashioned Protestant stuff. But the vast majority now, one of the reasons I left Protestantism is there's no reason to stop it. And as I said, the scripture culturification thing, that's all just taken. Oh no, it's okay. That's the thing about women not teaching, being in pastors. That's all right. We'll just push it away. That's a historical thing of that time. And again, and we all just do it. It's very fascinating. Sorry, just a little side note about women head covering. And St. John Chrysostom in 400 AD is writing on this matter. He says, and the Greeks didn't cover their heads. Yeah, this was actually an anti-cultural thing which has been done. The men used to cover their heads and the women didn't cover their heads. And so this was a reverse of what the Greeks were doing at the time. And so precisely what Paul was doing was actually acultural to the Greek populations of the time. And just another interesting side note, the scandal of Christianity was not women covering their heads to pray. It was men uncovering their heads to pray. This was a scandal. The Jews, you can see even me with a hat on, but the Muslims put on the hats, etc. Even the Greeks would cover. It's a man taking off his head, uncovering his head, which is actually the cultural scandal of the time. So yeah, it was just interesting to talk about Chrysostom speaking about and putting rubbish to this modern arguments, and he's much closer. He knows he knew what was happening. So anyway, that's on a little bit on the side there.
Well, yeah, I guess one of my last questions, I guess, to bring up the topic of Israel, which is one of the main topics today. It seems I'm hearing out of the Orthodox crowd a bit more criticisms of the actions of the state of Israel. I've stated before, I'm somewhere in the middle, where I still think the bringing about of the state of Israel is part of Bible prophecy, but kind of like the buck stops there. I can't, what they're doing is killing people, and so it's kind of like we're between a rock and a hard place here. How do you sort of interpret, what Israel and what it's doing, what's going on?
From my growing up in my Western culture, and just knowing a number of, I've got friends in Israel. I get on with the Israelis probably better than I do of Arabs as such. But I do have good Syrian friends and Christian ones as well. So I have a sort of a cultural heritage of supporting Israel. If they go to war, my emotional sides go Israel, go Israel. However, and as sort of my Protestant times, yay, Israel's coming back and build a temple and go. And my Orthodox side is going, whoa. The Jewish nation as an identity, as a national identity, is precisely the identity which is anti-Christian. It's precisely the identity that killed Christ, murdered Christ, because it was the Jews thought that the Messiah was going to give them national rule. National is going to be a ruler of the nations in a national humanistic imperial sense. When he came and died on the cross, it was like, no, what are you talking about? It's the kingdom of heaven and stuff. You got to get crucified. You got to, what sort of leader is this? Don't be stupid. Because they're seeking after this national thing, this national pride. And so the Jews are a nation. And ironically, very ironically, when it comes to the Nazis persecuting them and they claim that racism, etc., the Jews themselves are the epitome of racists because they are the chosen nation. They squash every other nation which is under them, and they'll wipe them out if they get in the way. So this is a sort of like a thing. Oh no! We got hurt. We got hurt by the Nazis. Now I'm totally agree with the Holocaust. That was really bad. I'm not at all for killing any Jews. To perish the thought. It's bad. But at the same time, they are dangerous. So you've got to keep a bit of distance from them because their way of thinking and stuff is not Christian. It's anti-Christian. We don't share anything really with them. People talk about Judeo-Christianity. I'm a little bit, no. Judaism, as it is now, is in opposition to Christianity. And as far as Christianity says, the scriptures, the Old Testament, are Christian scriptures. They belong to the Christian. They belong to Christ. They are his word. To that. So they're our scriptures. They're not the modern Jewish scriptures. The Jewish people, obviously, Israel up to Christ, that was their law. But then it became, we are the new Israel. The law is our law, which is now to be put aside in its regulations, but kept in its spirit. And so the Jews are in opposition to that. So we don't share anything with them religiously in that. Yes, we've got an identity that we come from Abraham and all the rest of it. But yeah, there's a love-hate relationship here. And then the church has always kept a distance from them. We're not supposed to make friends, go to them as doctors and stuff. We always keep a certain level of remove from them because ultimately the fact that they're going to be Jewish and not Christian is still in opposition to Christ, and it's the same motivation that killed Christ because he's not their savior. And of course, when the Antichrist comes, he will be their Messiah. And this is why Judaism is so important in this, because effectively he will be the secular Messiah that they're wanting. And he will basically come out of, be based in Israel and Judea. So the Jewish coming back together is a very big part of the final state of the Antichrist coming. And it's precisely through them filling their desire of the Messiah, etc., as glorifying the Jews as the top-notch nation in the world. So I think that's why I think the Jews have quite a lot of influence in the whole process, but there are times when they haven't things. But I'm not surprised that there is not, and you can see the Jewish control of the US, and every basically politician has his Jewish person knocking the doors. So yeah, as I said, emotionally, I quite like the Jews as people. Well, in a cultural sense, I can get on with them. So when I went to Jerusalem, when I walked into the Jewish area, I felt more comfortable walking around because it's modern, safe. When I was in the Arab areas, it's like, whoa. Obviously, I feel better in the Christian areas. Having said that, Israel is the only place where I walked in my cassock, I got frisked. They were about to steal some deodorant stick. And I said, look, I've been to the States. I've been to all sorts of countries with this. Don't be stupid. And they put it back. And then another funny time, because I'm from New Zealand, but I travelled on an Irish passport, and they said, where are you from? Oh, New Zealand. I handed them an Irish passport. So, but the Jews will be attacking Christianity. They will spit at Christian priests and things like that, some of the Jews. So they're not friends of Christians. In the 1940s, they drove Christians out of villages. Move or we'll destroy you. They're not protecting Christians who are basically in the Middle East, trying to keep their heads down. And like in Gaza, they don't care whether they bomb a Christian church or a Muslim thing, and the Christians are not wanting to fight the Jews. We want to live happily with them. So yeah, as I said, there's a big love-hate relationship with them. Certainly, I'm completely opposed to murdering or killing or harming Jews. Let them be in their things, but keep a little bit of distance of them. And I'm not surprised to see them killing the Gazans, etc. That's basically murder in a large. However, if I'm putting on my political Jewish hat, what else are they going to do? The only solution they've got is to actually wipe out, eliminate Gaza. That's the only way to get a long-term solution. So I can understand that. And so I at the same time as I condemn them, I'm thinking, don't be all nice about the Arabs, because they're just as brutal and nasty and wanting to kill Jews just for their political ends. So it's too bad people fighting each other. You can't pull out of it. Yeah, the Jews have been horrible about it, and maybe we should go back get rid of our modern 20th century sentimentalities and go back to the 15th century where we just say, oh, whatever, fight it out and see who wins.
It's a complicated situation. I guess maybe to ask you then, like, what do we do? With all of we've discussed this madness. I often just go back to Teddy Roosevelt's quote: "Do the best you can with what you got where you're at. Keep on living life, enjoying life, making some preparations for potential difficult times ahead with all these totalitarianism that's rising, and community. I think community is the most important, but then, beyond that, having some sustainable form of living, knowing someone who has a farm or has a source of water or some food, what do we do?
I'm sort of a similar opinion. Ultimately, the most important thing as a Christian is to make sure you are following the Christian faith faithfully, and you are being careful about what you are thinking about, what ideas and thoughts come into your mind, and that you have a level of bravery to stick up to Christian principles. For example, when the COVID came, we just kept doing the church services. Even if we had to do them outside the church because it was locked, we just kept going and doing them and going on. We're not going to stop for this. I'm not going to start changing my church services, putting masks on and stuff like that. We'll go. If I die because I get a disease by fulfilling my duty as a Christian, so be it. It's a martyrdom for God. And so, and again, this is the other part, is the mindset, to have the mindset to be ready to be a martyr, to have the ancient Christian that we are in a position now where we'll be persecuted. We will be, then there's subtle persecution now. If I was a teacher in a school trying to hold Christian belief and teach that, like this guy, this is a man, as a school, I had a girl who wanted to be a boy in the class, and I kept calling her a girl because it just, my instincts just said that's a girl in front of me. But I wasn't in trouble for that. But it's getting things like, I don't want to be a high school anymore, because you're expected to be able to teach things, and it's making it very hard to hold the Christian faith. But we need to have a side where we do keep some firmness about what it is to be a Christian. We're not becoming secular liberalists. We need to have sort of the heart, the strength of mind, ready to die for your faith, ready to suffer for it. And that is a really important thing. But you need to couple that with the love of God. If you don't actually love God, you don't spend time in prayer, you don't have a desire to go to church, you're going to be swished away. If you go to, it's like the lukewarm thing. If you're not hot for God, you'll just be washed away with this. And you'll be caught up. You actually don't need to worry about your life and your safety, because you'll just go along with the crowd. So you're actually in the safe. Your eternal life will not be in the best position, but so you're losing your soul for saving your life. But so to save your soul as such, you need to have a deep love of God, a deep continuing prayer, set yourself up for martyrdom. You can do certain things to prepare for, as you said, friends who have farms who can go and stay on, but you need quite a lot of land, and you need to survive long term, and it's very hard. And I'm not one for going out to be a survivalist. I think that actually is not helpful. You're better off. The better thing is to have a strong Christian, keep your strong Christian faith, trying to get to church, etc., as you can. Harden your mind to be a martyr, and if that comes, be a martyr. If that's necessary. If you can find some way but not to rush into that at the same time. So little things like friends of mammon who might support you, might house you, so you don't have to buy food for you. They're happy to take the mark of a beast or whatever, but they're your friends, so they'll support you. If little things like this, I think, helpful. Having, and be prepared to, maybe if you need to move, you've got the option to do so. Having some of this, but I wouldn't go too much into that. I think you can get overboard, and then nothing happens, and you absolutely messed up your life. And you don't necessarily set a good testimony either, because what you're doing is saying, I'm scared of getting hurt in this life. I'm scared of dying in this life. What does this witness to Christ? We shouldn't be fear of death or maiming or persecution in this life. We don't go around and grab it and seek it, force it upon ourselves. This is stupid, as early martyrs sometimes tried, and they fell. And nevertheless, we should harden ourselves to be ready to accept this, not run away and survivalists and killing people to live longer. What are you trying to live longer for? We're going to eternal life. We've got plenty of time to live. So it's how we live is important. So that's my basic way of thinking about these times.
1,000%. I've espoused that view for a long time. I just sometimes say all these people are freaking out and who listen to podcasts, and I need to have my survival home. But it's like, okay, great, you survived the New World Order, but you're still going to die, So, or the point that you've made, way back in 2008 when I was in Geneva, I met an older American couple, and they knew I was the conspiracy guy, and they're like, oh yeah, we had an uncle in the 1970s, a Vietnam veteran or something. He was talking about all this New World Order stuff. And if you think about it, like, if that man had been living in his bunker in the 1970s and then he dies of old age in the 2000s, it's kind of like, as you say, nothing happened. He missed out on living a normal life, while he was just kind of freaking out in his cave. And so that's exactly to your point. We have to have this balance. Make some preparations, but again, don't go crazy and don't have fear. Jesus said so many times, just stop being afraid. And I'm gonna try popularizing. I hadn't heard it put that way before when you said the martyr mindset. That's a great title for a book or something like that. The martyr mindset, and that's essentially what we have to have, this martyr mindset, and to not be afraid, to not comply. Like the martyr mindset is what has driven me for a long time. During COVID, not being afraid of being attacked by authorities for doing this podcast or anything to that extent. So thank you. Is there your links are in the description, your YouTube, your website?
I was going to talk a little bit more theoretical about empire and church, if I may. This is now having our conversation. We were going on to these modern times. I was very interested in looking at, if say things carry on for another 100 years or 200 years, as God wills. I do think it's very interesting looking at the US, Islam, UK, and the empire and the relationship between church and state. And I think when we look at the US, you've got an absolute separation between church and state. What happens is that a state has a cultural vacuum in the sense of what it believes. So therefore, secularism starts to come in because it's not under any religion. Therefore, secularism becomes the dominant principle. And then it becomes a power game of who's in control, starts to dictate the cultural consciousness of the people, consciousness of the government. And you can see this with the Democrats really starting to bring this progressive, woke type of thing, this ideology into the government way of thinking, etc. Quite opposed to Christianity. This is why I think there's been a bit of a backlash, because people are revolting against it. But that's because there's absolute separation of church and state, and that vacuum is filled by secular thought, and that whatever thought that is controlled by whoever's in power, and it becomes a power game to getting up to the top and filling that. So that doesn't actually work for a stable Christian-based society. It is going to end up in a society which is going to marginalize and persecute Christianity eventually, because the government systems are basically becoming secularized. Christianity becomes increasingly marginalized, which is why you're getting towards the Antichrist type thing. The other type of state problem is you get in English with the revolt against the Roman Catholics, is that this church becomes the department of state, comes under the king. And that's not good, because then the state controls the church and tends to, again, it's the same end, the state, because it's controlling the church, secular principles, power, politics, etc., start taking predominance. And so what you see with the Anglican Church, it comes kicking and screaming about 10 years, 20 years behind the state, just doing the same secularization, the same progressive values and stuff become the church values, because all the bishops are appointed by the state, who are basically living off secular opinions, etc. It's just about whoever gets in power, controls the universities, and that controls the church, and the church fades under secular power. You see it in Russia, and from about 18th century of Peter the Great. I don't like to call him great very much, but he basically takes churches by Department of State, starts controlling it, starts controlling the way it thinks and behaves, etc. You get the old believers revolting and that, but he sort of westernizes the whole culture of the church. Again, state and control, secularizing the church. Or you can go to another type of control where you get the church in charge of the state, like in Islam. The danger of this is that religion becomes a totalitarian control. Again, it's about this control at the top, enforcing everyone to conform to religious values, etc. And that is a type of religion that becomes oppressive and ultimately superficial, because you're doing it because you have to. And this is what Islam, there's no real depth, or spiritual depth in Islam. It's a superficial thing imposed on the top. You can see the way men behave and treat women. There's no piety there. They're just lustful and going after them. No wonder they have to hide the women off. And when they get the Western women, they just go completely banana. Oh, what is this piety of self-control? There's nothing there, because it's all top-down control. And people start revolting. Obviously, the Islamic nations hate the US and the influence of the US on their populations. I think people are not realizing that the US, the reason why Islam hates the US so much is because it's bringing all this culture in. which is an anathema to the elites of the Islamic cultures. Though they are breaking down now, over time they too are starting to lose that. So that's why Islam fuels the fanatics in Islam. Unfortunately, Islam has it's okay to murder people and die by you killing people as your martyrdom, and so this is good, and let's go to war and slay all the sort of. That's because Islam is simply Christianity, a version of Christianity which reverted to Judaism, pre-Christian Judaism, that it's okay to kill the heretics, sort of thing. It's nothing. It's not a separate religion or anything. It's just a horrible distortion of Christianity back to sort of false Judaism, which is one of the reasons we have such a war with the Jews. So that sort of government doesn't work. What works is fascinating in the Roman Empire. So what happens? Christianity is initially persecuted, then Constantine comes along and says, "Oh, this Christianity is not such a bad thing." Why isn't it such a bad thing? Because Christianity actually helps the empire. So the people are taught to be obedient to the civil authorities, even if they're not worshipping them, but they are obedient to the civil authority. But the church and the empire have a common goal. They are universal for all peoples. They are transnational, so that they, in a sense, the Romans don't destroy national identity. They just ask everybody to pay tribute and remember the emperor and there, but otherwise use a lot of local autonomy. This suits the church quite well. All nations are in the church. We are united together in a sort of unified body. And so as a religion, that works for the empire very, very well. And the key thing about integrating the church and the empire is that the two and their hierarchies are utterly separate, in the sense that the church, the emperor never appoints the leaders of the church. The church appoints its own leaders. If someone's appointed by emperor, he's cut off. It is not allowed to. And at the same time, the imperial leader is not appointed by the church. That's an imperial matter. So even if the guy backstabs, and the church just basically accepts whoever the leader is, even if it's an assassination, backstab, whatever, the church goes, okay, if the empire is happy with that, we will go along with it. Because these power of who chooses who needs to be kept separate. Now, the church might go, hey, you can't murder people, naughty. But in the sense, you're the leader. Okay, we accept that, and the state basically has to accept. This means that the state then takes the church as a constitution. So the laws of the church become the constitution of the state. They become embedded in the law of the state. So the ecumenical councils were actually called by the emperors and became the law of the state. So Christianity is effectively the constitution of the state. So it's a Christian state. But the powers of the guardians of the constitution are totally submitted to God and outside the power structure of the state. They're not allowed to work for the state. The two power structures have to be kept distinct. So that stops power politics of secular power politics is controlling the narrative of what the religion is. Religion is kept distinct from power politics of the state. Now, there is influences fighting back in the times when the emperors try to impose iconoclasm and causes utter chaos in the church. But the church wins in the end. God wins and says, no, keep your nose out of the controlling the church. You've got your place over there. And that worked very. That was a stable political church system that lasted for over 1,000 years. And so this is where I think the proper integration of it in the state is truly Christian. So Islam go away. And this is why you don't want anyone in the politicians generally have to be part of a church, because you don't want people in the politics who can destroy the system. You don't want to bring in that. Not that you want to persecute them necessarily, but if you bring them in, you start to corrupt the actual constitution of the state. And this is the same in Britain. There's a certain say you actually want people who are growing up for generations in Parliament, because there's no constitution. And it's by the continuing feel, this way of bringing up that you maintain the traditions, and it's got to be maintained. As soon as you start putting ideology in, or people from different cultural groups start to take too much power, the whole system will fall apart back into the secularization. So the other thing in the state and church-state separation is in Christianity, you have to become Christian freely. Your Christian faith can't be forced on them. God doesn't force us, otherwise we'd all be Christians if he could have. It has to be free. So having the church-state separation, again, allows the state to have a tolerance of other religions, etc. It also allows that while it's the church's law is part of a state law, it can be mediated, softened, and things like this, so it's not too burdensome on all other people. They can have a space, because the church law only really applies to Christians, but the state wants to have it because that's actually the best way for humans to relate to each other in the image of God. But then the other thing is, like Christ says, guy comes up, oh, help me with my inheritance, divide it up. And Christ says, oh, this is a secular matter. This is not us. And so also it means that the church keeps away from getting involved in too many secular things, becoming caught up in the politics of the world, the secular things. It can maintain its focuses on the salvation of souls, on union with God. And so even if the church laws are actually quite light on many things, because it's not trying to impose sort of too much control on the details of inheritance. So let the secular government sort that out. Let the secular government control the armies as well, so the church is not going to war. And so that's a symphony which worked very well. Roman Catholicism started to change it because the Pope started to take control over emperors. He appointed Charlemagne. This actually ruptured the unity of the empire, and that's why the East revolted against that, because you have no right to do that. That's a secular state's right to do that. That's okay. If there's a woman on the throne, maybe you're right that she shouldn't be there, whatever. But that's not for you to be starting to appointing the rulers, taking the imperial authority, secular authority on yourself. And so you start seeing this, and that actually, and I had to talk with a friend of mine, there is actually an important part of it. Christianity works better with a state-church symphony as well. So the Pope destroyed that. He starts taking power. Kings come and kiss him as if he's a ruler. Papal states, papal army. It becomes secularized. And there's no wonder there's a revolt later. It becomes another worldly power among worldly powers. It loses the transcendence of the church. The other thing I was interested in the church is that an Orthodox, for Roman Catholicism, is that we don't have one bishop who can control all others, to call them into an ecumenical council so that they all must do this. The reason being is it's to stop heresy, like one guy imposing himself on all those others feeling like they have to obey, and the whole church suddenly believes some false doctrine. So they actually didn't have that structure. That's why the emperors had to call them together and say, what is it that you believe? Come on, tell me. And he invites everyone in the world to show, because the tradition is held in all places at all times. So what is a common testimony? And they come in a sort of egalitarian thing under the empire. They have their ranks, but they all come and speak. And there's a unanimous confession. This is what we've always believed. And the emperor's like, okay, good. That's what we're going to put our faith of the empire. Thank you for telling me. And it's a confession to the world what the Christian belief is from the shared common. But it's not a control where one bishop is telling them, bringing in, we're going to decide this is our faith and stuff. No, it's a confession of a common tradition. So anyway, I thought I would share that. And so we have problems of states now. If you're going to have a good, long-lasting state, which is going to, I think, be effective in this world, you need one where that's that proper symphony of church and state, where the Christianity is the constitution of the state, and yet the powers are kept distinct. The bishops have a martyrdom thing that if the state tries to impose itself, they'll go down by the sword fighting for the truth. That's why monks are quite useful. They get and so but I don't see that coming back into place. I think Russia is the closest to that, but it's still a little bit, I think, state dominated. And I don't see that the church is sort of constitutionally working in Russia, except a common sort of Russian world ethnos type approach. which is not really Christianity. So, but that for me, until that sort of empire came, I think we're going to be just continuing to slide down the slope of secularization and Antichrist, as you.
Yeah, you answered my question. I was going to ask if you saw anything like that today, and I guess not. And I've wondered that for a while, and yeah, I mean, it does seem to make sense what you the formula you laid out. And I was just thinking, a century ago, here in Mexico, was it less than a century ago? A century ago, you had the Guerra Cristera, where you had this. I mean, it's on paper. It was this Masonic, Marxist Mexican government. Who there was a great film made about it. I recommend it to people. It's got that famous actor in it. What's it called? For the Greater Glory, and Andy Garcia. Greater Glory is the English film, the true story of Cristiada, and how they went to exterminate Christians, particularly Catholics, but the Mexican government went to systematically exterminate, people of faith, and this was just a century ago. So, like, if it had happened where I'm standing not long ago, it can very well happen again.
Yeah, yes. Well, I mean, it happened in Russia, didn't it? The Orthodox Christians were exterminated, millions of them. We don't talk about the actual pogroms against Christianity in Russia. It was incredible, and not only that, Mao Zedong in China. Massive killing of Christians. There was quite a large Chinese Christian communities up in the northeast that just killed off or fled the country. Yes, thankfully we're actually in a little bit of peace now, but in the West where it's shifting westwards, this type of thing, and the progressives, things like that, and putting you in jail, people praying silently out on the street outside abortion clinics, and going to jail, and they're not even saying anything there because someone might perceive and get worried about that. And I must admit, if I go on my little rant about abortion, I'll just have a little rant for a second. If you, I just still can't believe that so-called women, particularly, that the biologically the child is a different body within the woman's body, that is just pure biology, and it's a time that needs most protection by its mother, and so to kill it is murder. It's a separate person, and women have been deluded to at the time where they are the baby most needs their protection, to murder the baby inside them. It's just pure murder. I can't see any other justification of it. Right to my body, etc. It's not your body. And this touches on another old-fashioned thing. The child is traditionally the man's child, being born by the woman. This has been lost as well. And this is actually dangerous for relationships, that the wife needs to think of her children as her husband's. Why? Because if you get a relationship where the wife thinks the children is hers, then there's a problem with the children that the husband, they start separating, they start pulling apart from the husband. He comes like the monster, the guy over there, it's woman and my children. If it's his children, then there's that, brings towards that unity. But again, if it's his children, then she's murdering his child in her womb. It's not her child to kill. And so and this is just biological, and the deception of this is feminism. There's women's right of a body and stuff. What for? Pleasure, for jobs, careers, all these secular things. So I find this is really horrifying. But you see that the state now is protecting this. Oh, and Roe v. Wade, and people, how dare you get rid of this? Trump say, well, he doesn't. We'll just leave it to states to decide. But but the way that the government is controlling murder, that's why I want to make the point of that. And how dare you get in the way of us murdering, even make someone a little bit scared of the fact that they're going to murder their child, who have a conscience about it.
I would agree with you. It's not their body. It's another body within their body. So it's not their body. They're harming a separate entity, person. There's a great movie a documentary, 30 minutes. It's not very long. I think it's 30 minutes, by Living Waters, 180, the movie. And it's very powerful. It talks about abortion, and yeah, it's like I forget the number. It's tens of millions, almost. I mean, just the numbers are insane when you talk about abortion. It's like, the simple thing is have the child and give it to an orphanage. If that's the sort of like least worst option. And yeah, it's yeah. There's a lot to say there. Any other thought you wanted to get across?
No, that's my little rants and thoughts on these topics. Unless you've got any more questions.
We've covered the waterfront. Yeah, where are the best places you'd like people to go to? Websites.
I have I think we gave you some links, but my parish, if anyone's interested in my religious side of me, is St. George's Hermitage. There's a YouTube channel we've got. I do little talks and sermons, get on, my parishioners want me to do that. So, it's called St. George's Hermitage is the name of the site. If you might have a link up there. We have a web page, which is St. George's Hermitage, like all one word, sort of St. George's Hermitage. Yes, .uk. So there's that as well but that's just sort of got our service schedules. And I have a couple of books, but they're all church-based. One is, as you mentioned, on the minor clergy. You can get them on Amazon.com. The minor clergy of the Orthodox Church. And the other one I've called The Church Deifying Relations. That's my PhD thesis. Just I self-published it, bang it out as a book. So you have to excuse the little quirks and the lack of thorough checking the writing. And the minor clergy was my master's dissertation. Again, just bang straight out into a book. And yeah, the church deifying relations. It's all about relations between hierarchical relations of a church, but husband and wife, monk, abbot, and these relationships actually help us to come into union with God, because we need to have it produced through tangible relationships where we actually obey somebody, or we have to actually love somebody and tolerate them and take care of them. And these relationships actually help us to form the right character, right mindset to love and to become into union with God. And so, and these are hierarchical relations, which are filled with the mystery of God. They're formed in Christ, with Christ. The husband and wife are in Christ. Christ is present in the relationship. So not only are they helping us to form the right mindset, we actually engage Christ through the relationship. So in the relationship, we are actually relating to Christ, who's present in the relationship, especially when it comes to the priests and the bishops. And so that's why in Orthodox Church, you tend to kiss the hand of the priest, or that is not kissing my hand. It is kissing the hand of Christ, who is present in the priest, giving the blessing to the person. And so there's these things about a real tangibility of our relationship with Christ through human orders and hierarchies and stuff. Of course, that's always taken with a pinch that the husband does make mistakes, and we always have to have this balance between discernment, which is maturity, that we discern what is of Christ and what is not. If it's not of Christ, we do. But that also helps us to build up this martyr mentality and discernment mentality. So even in our relationships, we have to obey by default. We obey government by default, but we're always having to be careful. We have to be mature ourselves. We have to own the faith ourselves. So if the husband says, go murder someone, no, you're not to do that. You are to follow Christ. You only follow him as far as Christ. You don't use an excuse to disobey him. That's also a problem. But so this is a certain maturity, which is a point of the relationship, is each person becomes fully mature in of themselves. It's not sort of a hierarchical oppression. And the relationships are built on a fundamental, which is, I think, important for this show in this sense as well. My understanding of humanity is in the image of God. And according to St. Chrysostom, that is authority, the rule. And to have authority, you have to have freedom. You have to have self-will, self-control. You have to be reasonable. And so it is fundamental to the hierarchical system that the ones higher in the hierarchy must respect the authority to rule of those lower in the hierarchy. And so even right down in the family, children have to have a space where the child has a space of ruling, that they have their own boss of something, even if it's just a toy or something like that. The parents don't micromanage the children. They have to have a little bit of space for themselves. The husband doesn't micromanage the wife. She has her rule over the household and things like that. He has oversight over the whole, but he gives her the space that she's in charge of her space. And the parish priest, I have oversight of all the people in my parish and their well-being, but I don't control what goes on inside the house, though I will set standards of morality of what goes on inside the house. But it's not for me to control that. It's not the bishop to control the presbyter in his parish. Then he has his space. So it's all about the space of allowing people to rule and to have control, which is a sort of federalized system. Even the higher church is no absolute control. You have no control within the space of the other person's authority, so that they have the true manifestation of God in them, that they truly become fulfilled in a godlike way. And you can see in all societies, when you start to control people, can crush them, people revolt, because you're fundamentally denying what they are as human beings. But it has to be managed according to certain orders and structures, otherwise you get chaos. So yes, there we go. That's my PhD in a nutshell.
All right. Very fascinating stuff. All the links are in the description for anyone who is interested. And it's funny how we arrange these just organically, these chats. So it was great to meet you virtually here. And again, thank you for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. It was good fun to talk. I hope I didn't say too much.